Hello, and welcome to our weekly Tuesday webinar. I'm Anna Hall, CEO of the Northeast Charter Schools Network, and I am standing in for Yomika today as she takes some well-deserved time off. As in the past, I'm joined by Susie Carello, Executive Director of the New York City's on my brain, you'll see why in just a moment, of the SUNY Charter Schools Institute, David Frank, Executive Director of the Charter Schools Office at NYSID, Lori Hazley, Senior Director of Charter Authorizing and Accountability at New York City DOE, and Corey Callahan from the New York City Charter Center. I'm going to share a few updates from us at the association before we turn it over to David, Susie, and Lori for their updates, and then turn to questions. So I'm going to lead off with breaking news. Literally just now, Governor Cuomo held a press conference where he announced that the state is, under his leadership, is setting up cluster zones of 3 different levels: red, orange, and yellow. These levels will have different degrees of limiting gatherings, including school and business closures. So obviously of particular interest to all of us, schools in orange and red zones will close until their infection rates decrease enough to put them into the category of a yellow zone or below. He didn't specifically name or identify the context of a green zone, maybe for the reasons that as soon as I just said that out loud, I realized that that has other implications. But schools that are in yellow zones will not close, but they will be required to do weekly testing of students and staff, the exact percentage of which will be determined and communicated by the Department of Health, the State Department of Health, in the coming days. So this is a result of the fact that the top 20 zip codes in the state, the majority of which are in New York City, have infection rates of collectively 5.5% compared to a 1.2% statewide average. As of right now, there is not a list that matches zip codes to color categories. So the prior communicated New York City closures that had already been announced will still stand, and it's unclear what color categories those zip codes belong to, or the zip codes that are on the watch list, what color categories those would be assigned to. If your school is in one of the zip codes that before the color category announcement was made, was either in a closure zone or a watch list zone, you should have heard from your authorizer yesterday. So if you're not sure whether or not your school is in one of these zip codes, you can feel free to reach out to us, to your authorizer, to this charter center, and we can help clarify that for you. But it's not a long list of schools. So even schools in New York City, you can feel pretty confident that if you are in one of those zip codes, but you would have found out. But if you're concerned and want to clarify, you can certainly reach out to any of us and we can be able to help you. So I think that we will continue to be in touch, as I'm sure Corey and the DOE will as well, as the specifics and the implications of these color categories become more clear. However, I would say if these current closures are any guide, which sort of took place over the weekend, were formalized yesterday and schools were closed today, the decisions could be made quickly and without a lot of notice. So our recommendation would be to be sure that you have a communication plan for your staff and your families to alert them formally of a closure, if only to dispel what could become problematic rumors about where schools are closed and where they are not closed, in particular because this new statewide classification system is a similar but different classification system than potentially what the city was using, and I think it's likely to cause a lot of confusion. And so making sure that families know, for example, that if your school is closed, they will find out officially in one way and not others could probably be valuable. Also of note, but less of a breaking news type category, open meeting law provisions have been extended until November 3rd. Our expectation is that they will be further extended after that date, but if history is any guide, the actual extensions might not take place until pretty close to November 3rd. So we'll be sure to update you. On a couple of more positive notes, we've heard from a lot of schools interest in seeing exemplary artifacts for the current context along the lines of the dashboard that Lori mentioned last week. So tip of the hat and big thanks to the Renaissance Innovation High School, who was kind enough to allow Lori to share that. So in the coming weeks, we'll encourage you as well as authorizers to share anything that you have or that you've seen that you think would be helpful to others in the sector. So please feel free to email us anything that you have that you think would be helpful to share. And we'll also be posting that dashboard from Renaissance to our website in the coming days. 2 upcoming events to note before Susie, Lori, and David give their updates. Please join us on Thursday this week from 6 to 8 p.m. for a virtual civic engagement event designed to raise awareness of both registering to vote as well as voting. This event is taking place in collaboration with KIPP, Uncommon, Achievement First, C3S, and the state associations from New York, as well as Massachusetts, New Jersey, and Connecticut. And so please share with your staff, alumni, and parents. The content is wide-ranging and appropriate for all of those categories, as well as any and all of you. We'll drop a link to the registration in the chat. And we also have a digital flyer that if you would be interested in sharing with your staff and families, please email Kayla on our team, and Kayla will drop her email in the chat, and we're happy to share. And then final programming update, please be on the lookout. We're really excited to be sending out in the very near future the specific schedule for our jam-packed virtual conference, which will take place on October 21st, 22nd, and 23rd. Over the course of those 3 days, there's content for charter staff, leaders, boards, parents, as well as alumni. So check out the schedule and be sure to register. So with all of that, Susie, Lori, and David would love to turn it over to you all for your updates. And David, if I could put my finger on the scale of your update and ask that you also speak to the recent announcements that came out last week about state tests, that would be fantastic.
Sure. So it's good to see everyone again on this Tuesday. I think it's 31, number 31, something like that. 101, 31.
I still feel 29, David. So
29. There you go. There you go. Well, actually, Friday was my birthday, and next year I do have a very big birthday coming up. So not this one, but I
21.
21.
So wild.
I do just want to start off with thanking our educators. I actually was speaking with a school leader early this morning, and she was talking to me about the challenges that go with operating a school in these very difficult environments, that there's so much unease and uncertainty and fear. And we, at the end of the call, we both said, this is for the kids, that every day what gets us and myself, and I know Susie and Lori and Anna and Corey and all of the team up out of bed and yourselves is we hope to make a better system for children who need support. And when you look around at some of the opportunities that students have in your schools, in our charter schools, it is ameliorating a terrible situation. And to think that in some parts of the state, and maybe the part of the state that you live, that the first time children were back in school, maybe one day, was last week. And some of our schools have been in session for a month plus now, either in person or in high quality remote settings or in a hybrid, that I applaud you. And all of you are my heroes. And I know this is something that Susie has said in the past, and I wholeheartedly agree with her sentiment. Also, as to build off on something that Anna said, you have 4 days to register to vote if you live in New York State. And so please register to vote, have your families register to vote. I personally think that that's the best thing that we can do. And so I hope that no matter, I shouldn't say no matter who you vote for, but please register to vote and make sure people vote. I'll talk a little bit about testing. Many of you saw that last week, the New York State Education Department and our Vice Chancellor put out a memo on state testing. And the Vice Chancellor, in his memo, it actually came out on the 30th. Time flies so fast. It was last week. But he laid out the requirements that the state has for ensuring that testing, the sort of the prerequisites for testing here in New York State. And first and foremost, that assessment must be done in a fair, equitable, and safe manner for all students and teachers. And talking about the requirements that we have as a state from the federal government to either administer assessments or not. And so far, the federal government has been very clear that, that they believe that state testing is essential in order for us to have an understanding of where students are academically, particularly given the learning losses that have occurred during the pandemic, and in particular for our state's most vulnerable students and our country's most vulnerable students. I also was heartened to see that this wasn't just a message from the Trump administration, but Patty Murray, who's the senator, the Democratic senator from Washington, who is the chairwoman of the Senate's Education Committee. I forget, it's called Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. She echoed Secretary DeVos' statements that emphasizing the importance of testing. So perhaps regardless of who wins the election, that stance will be maintained. But ultimately, it may be out of the state education department's hands whether or not to administer assessments. That being said, we want, whether assessments happen or not, two things. Your school should be educating students based on the standards set forth in your charter. And it doesn't matter, I know none of your schools teach to the test and educate just to get a test score. So keep up the work of educating students, but also we need, on an administrative side, we need to prepare for the administration of the ELA and math exam, as well as the Regents exams later this academic year. Particularly the 3 through 8 math and ELA assessments need to be ordered. And we have some time, but time flies in this current pandemic. So by December 11th, your school needs to submit an order for state assessments as you normally do. There's, of course, we're the state ed department, so there's a memo on that. And I shared the memo in the chat. Just so you know, in case you're afraid of missing anything, my office does put all of what we think are the pertinent memos up on our website, including the memos on assessment and the Vice Chancellor's message. So that's all in the link. So that's your one-stop shop for exciting memos. And other than doing great things for kids, you know, I got into this work to write a good memo. Just kidding. The last thing I want to talk about is our fiscal requirements. And I want to thank both my colleague, Janet Klein, as well as the fantastic team at SUNY, particularly Barb Achenauer and Connor LeClaire, who have helped us through this process. We're working very hard to get the ESSA Fiscal Transparency Portal up and running. But we want to make sure that the questions in that ESSA Fiscal Transparency Portal, which is required by federal statute, are the least burdensome for you and your school. So it's taken us a little bit of time. That being said, two announcements. One, audited financial statements, as well as your management letters, will still be due on November 2nd. They'll still be due on that date. However, for SUNY authorized schools, you're going to submit those not to us at State Ed, but you're going to submit those right to SUNY. And Susie's going to talk a little bit about that right after me. For Board of Regents authorized schools, DOE authorized schools, and Buffalo authorized schools, we're going to send you directions on how to do that, how to submit that information through our portal. But I'm going to send you an email tomorrow outlining all of this. So no need to take notes unless you want to. The other thing is you still have a requirement to submit ESSA fiscal transparency information to us at the state. whether you're SUNY authorized or DOE authorized or Board of Regents authorized, that's going to be pushed back, the deadline to do that, until November 30th. So we're going to give you a month extension to do that. So the things you need to remember are twofold. One, audited financials and management letters, which you have already. These are PDFs generally. You're going to submit those to SUNY if you're SUNY authorized. If you're not SUNY authorized, you'll submit them to us. Further details to come out tomorrow. The ESSA fiscal transparency reporting, which is going to be easy, particularly if you're a SUNY authorized school. Barbackenauer and Connor have made sure that it'll be an easy cut and paste into our system. That's going to be due on November 30th. Rest assured, I will email all of you that tomorrow. But if you have any questions, either reach out to myself, david.frank@nised.gov, or the fantastic team at SUNY, and they will make sure that you get the right information. So I will leave it at that. Always exciting news on our weekly Tuesday webinars. With that, I'll turn it over to Susie.
Thanks, David. I appreciate that. While we're giving a big shout out to the Mighty Mighty Institute team, a couple of notes about the work of Barb and Connor and John and Malik and all of the folks that support our finance and data side of things. They are, as David indicated, in a never-ending crusade to try to lessen the number of bureaucratic reporting obligations you have. We appreciate the partnership with the State Ed Department, so we get all of those audits. We'll package them together and send them off. So thank you. Another big shout out to the Institute Finance team is if you want to, live like an authorizer and get on the National Association of Charter School Authorizers webpage, they have posted a series of financial support documents, guidelines, and best practices that, again, I'm super proud to say that my colleagues at the Institute were instrumental in creating. And so thanks to them. Wanted to also let our schools know that I think most of you have gotten an acknowledgement letter from us, and the team asked me to just clarify for you that once you get that acknowledgement letter, you're done. You don't have to respond to it. We gave some advice or counsel in some of those letters about what you might consider as your plans change through the year, but you don't need to respond back to us on that acknowledgement letter. Again, trying to limit the number of times you have to submit a report. And in that spirit, big shout out to Coney Island Prep and Leslie Bernard, thank you. I'm gonna tell everybody else what I asked him today. As your schools are experiencing these changes, which we knew were gonna come, right? It's fluid this year and we're all gonna be comfortable, at least, as far as we possibly can, in you trying to manage and support your students and families and staff as schools stay closed, as you try to get kids back in the building. So if you all have an opportunity as that's happening, if you are sending out communication to the parents about what's happening, think about forwarding that to us, or just shoot me an email. If you can think about it, or a text, or give me a call, let me know, keep us in the loop so that we know what's happening at your school in case we need to get a hold of you or there's some way we can support you in that. Also, wanted to give a big shout out to the newest group that is a member of the charter school community here in the state of New York. The SUNY Charter Schools Committee met this morning and approved the application for Buffalo Commons Charter School. So we are very happy to have them join us. They are mighty, brave, and strong for standing in the middle of a pandemic and saying, yes, we're going to open a school next year. And in fact, they have some big brothers and sisters in the 9 SUNY charters that opened this year for the first time, which is kind of crazy. We also were able to do our first set of renewals this year, so big shout out to the Icons and the Rochester Prep Schools. And I've also got on my list, just to remind you, as you saw today, if you watched the SUNY Charter Schools Committee meeting, that the open meetings law has been extended, as David said, until November 3rd. So I think that's all I have for now. Lori?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. That's awesome, awesome news, Susie. I do not have any updates at this time. Renewal schools, we continue to talk as I review your renewal applications and schools. I still have a few schools left to talk to about reopening plans, but most of you have already spoken with you, and I don't have any other updates at this time.
Great, thanks. We'll turn to questions. We have some that we received in advance, and then I'll go to the Q&A. Just a reminder, please use the Q&A and not the chat for questions, because when people ask questions in the chat only, we see it, and it's always helpful, I think, for folks that see each other's questions. All right, so a question that we received in advance before we get into the lots of questions generated by color coding system is related to district requirements for student registration. So if a charter school or their families are experiencing issues with districts offering insufficient operating hours or opportunities for families to complete registration requirements, is there a best contact at SED or process with any of the authorizers, although I think probably not DOE, to alert them to this issue, especially considering its potential future impact on student billing?
So the district won't allow them to register? Is that the issue?
I think it's that, and I've heard this now from 2 different non-New York City districts. The offices are mostly closed, or they're saying that a student failed to register during a time period when the district office wasn't open, and so are not allowing a student to be considered registered from the date that a school would consider them to have been registered, because they didn't complete the process with the district, but there was not really a way for them to have completed the process with the district.
We always want, we always hope that you can work things out with the district, and so it might be appealing up the chain if you haven't had much luck with frontline staff. Ultimately, though, you should provide the educational service to the student and bill if you're serving that student within the ability of your charter, or within the confines of your charter, you know, the age range and number of students. Ultimately, you know, there are a few avenues to proceed if the district is not allowing you to bill for that student. Then you can file an intercept. Or if you feel that the district is penalizing the school in other ways, there's an appeal process. It's called a 310 appeal, and I gave a link to that process. But our hope is that you can work things out with the district. And your first step before going to a 310 appeal or even an intercept might be to talk to your legal counsel and seeing if perhaps a letter from your lawyer or a conversation between your lawyer and their lawyer will work out. And I think that's unfortunate, but you know, the other thing to think about is on the district side, they might not have the same operating flexibilities that you do, and so you might want to negotiate some timeline where they will register the students, with the understanding that you will serve those students in the interim. But you might want to talk to your legal counsel about that.
Yeah, I would only also add, districts' registration policies are an act of their board, and so they are public policies, and you should be able to find them on the district or the board website, and whatever the forms or documents are that are required for district registration can't be different than for charter registration. And so I think it's a best practice, especially if you are in a district or you have students from a district where any of this shenanigans are going on or seem like they could go on, collect those registration documents directly from families and provide them to the district directly if need be. So in that case, the only thing that the district is lacking is the families are showing up in person, which in the current context would be I would love to see the argument that that is the that is a necessary activity when in all other cases not being in person is has been avoidable. But if we can help in any way, certainly also let us know. All right, turning to some questions in the Q&A. And so I'm going to try to bucket these. And Corey, I would invite you, if you have any greater insight, heard more or different things from the governor's press conference than what I summarized earlier, to please share your best guidance, because a lot of these answers right now are going to be, we don't know. And I think if you've been playing along at home for the past 7 months with some of the governor's edicts, the details get filled in the days following the press conference. They are not necessarily sort of fully baked or packaged or rolled out as of the day of the press conference or when they're announced. So for example, Greg asked, are charters in yellow zones responsible for paying or administering required testing? My expectation would be no, but I think what we can also observe is that there has not been a ton of clarity about charter access to some of the infrastructure of testing in New York City as it is. And so I think the short answer there is we don't know, and we'll let you know as soon as we know more. So Stacy, similar question, who will conduct the testing in the yellow schools? Don't know. I can only assume that the interest of this program would be best served by it being the same sort of testing and tracking and tracing that is going on elsewhere. I don't know that there's going to be some new or different resource for testing at this point in all of these things. But again, Corey, I see that you're off mute. I don't know if you have words of wisdom or a different perspective there.
No, I'm multitasking furiously with various sources. So just so folks know, DOE Charter School Office wasn't able to join the call. Both Anjali and Erin were called away. So unfortunately, we don't have any info yet. I know they are obviously furiously working not only on identifying the zip codes. I think that is a question I'm seeing come up of like, if I was one of the 11, which actually increased today to 13 zip codes that are on the watch list, have I been made orange? Have I been made yellow? Where am I? All of that, we're still waiting for the official word to come out from the governor's office. I know folks saw a picture and saw coloring, and a lot of the people are thinking maybe that's me, and he could be right, but we just want to wait and see. I will note that the New York Times is writing that while this is announced today, the closures are going to happen by Friday. So I think folks, you know, this doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have to close down for tomorrow. It might. I don't want to say you don't, but I just want to, just to repeat what Anna said, like I think there's a couple days that we'll have as we sort this out. I will say for schools that are closed, so if you're in one of the 9 New York City zip codes right now that is experiencing closure, the DOE sent out an email to all those schools on Monday night. I think the most important info, well, there's a lot of info in the email, but the most important is probably the food info. And for that, basically the DOE is, you know, still providing food for takeout meals for families. And so I'm just going to put in the chat to everyone the link where you should send your families if you ever need to send them information. But I know that DOE will be sending this information along, again, to any schools that end up in the closure zone. And yes, to Greg's point on the testing, top of mind for me too. What does this mean for kind of all the testing problems that the charter sector has faced with getting access to expedited testing? I think a lot of what just came out of this press conference might change quite a bit of what is currently happening.
I totally agree. And I'm a glass half full kind of gal, so take this with a grain of salt, but I will say, like, I think for the better, right? I think the potential positive of a sort of messy sort of midstream change, of course, that is statewide, is that the governor has like a little bit more latitude to just mandate that things be done. And I think what we have seen up to this point is that transcends some of the boundaries that have been stickiest around some of these questions in New York City in particular up to this point. So if the governor says that you're in a yellow zone and you have to test, my strong inclination is that those resources are going to be made available to you in a way that potentially there was some question about before. In terms of this question about how you're going to know on this map, I think we're going to know more in the next day or two. As of right now, if you already knew that you were on the list to be closed or that you were on the watch list, that is still the best controlling information. But I know, the authorizers were sort of furiously calling through schools yesterday when they were aware of who was on what list. And I'm sure, as we will all do once we have greater clarity about the colors on the map and where the boundaries are, we'll all get that information out as soon as possible. To the question about what do you do if your school is not in a color zone, but you're an orange or a red zone, but your students are coming from orange or red zones, it's my understanding that that is part of the definition of what yellow zones are, that there could be some yellow zone definition because they are boundary to red and orange zones. And I think take into consideration that sort of flow of people, but also, at this point, TBD. I will say, and I would look to the authorizers to weigh in here, if any of these things, whether they're rates or your color category or the color category of where the majority of your students are coming from, factor into your thinking about the degree to which or whether or not you are in person, it is still in your purview to make that decision. And so you do not have to wait necessarily to be told that you are red or orange and be closed. So I'll look at David, Susie, and Lori and see if you all have anything to add to that, whether that's because you find out what color you are or what color your students are, or you're just sort of looking at all of these factors coming together and want to get ahead of it. David, Susie, Lori, not sure if you have any thoughts there.
I'm happy to dive in. I think a number of our schools have opened and have students in the building. A number of our schools were waiting until October to make a determination about that. And we've had conversations in both categories, some that said we were waiting till October who've now made a determination. And again, Anna's right, it's the school that has made the determination that they're going to provide fully remote instruction, throughout this particular semester, and reevaluate, at the beginning of next month. Similarly, we've had some who have had in-person days who are now indicating that it's really tough on staff and families to be open and to close and maybe close and be open and maybe, and I've said this all along, you are superior leaders, even in the face of ever shifting information. And you are the ones, SUNY is not the one that's going to make the best decision for your school community. So, and that underscores and when you make a decision, can you either forward your communication to your team or your parents to us so that we're in the loop, or just shoot us an email. And if any of you want to talk through any particular situation, give us a shout. We're happy to talk anytime.
Yes, I would fully agree with what Susie said. You all do have it within you have the ability to make decisions for your school, as many of you put in your reopening plans, your own individual triggers for reverting to all remote. And so you have that option. And I know just as many of you have come up with creative ways to serve your particular communities, I know that you will continue to do that. Perhaps it's allowing parents from red or yellow zones to opt into all remote if they had been attending in person, or something to that effect. You all have the ability to create solutions particular to your communities and families. and agree with Susie. Please do just keep me in the loop as you make those decisions.
And further information is forthcoming. This is brand new for all of us. These new requirements. So we'll certainly be in touch. And it's a difficult situation. We don't have all the answers right now, but we will work very hard to get additional information.
Great. I'm going to turn to a couple of, I think, largely SED questions, some questions about NICETEL, things like that, and then hand it over to Corey to field as best she can some of the New York City specific questions. And at some point, maybe we can have a competition for the best way to say we don't know. Because we're especially today, this is all new information. So David, it looks like you wanted to answer Vernon's question about the Charter Weekly sharing a deadline to complete the NICETEL by October 29th, but what to do if the school would still continue to be remote past that date.
Yep. So at the September Board of Regents meeting, the Regents passed additional regulatory flexibilities regarding the assessment of English language learners. And so any parent of a student who attends a school that's operating fully remote or have opted to have their child receive instruction remotely can request a waiver of administration of the NICETEL. And SED is developing a template for that, but you might just want to create one on your own, having a parent write a letter to the superintendent of the school, whoever, your school leader, your CEO, saying that they would like to be granted such a waiver. And then once that waiver is accepted by your school, the child will be considered initially identified for this academic year, for 2021, unless the child changes back to in-person. And then once the child comes back, then you have the 10 days to administer the NICETEL. So if you're fully remote, just have, like many things in this pandemic, just keep records for your students. You might want to make an easy template, just have the parents sign or have them send you an email asking for a waiver. They'll be considered the student will be considered an English language learner until they come back in person, and then you have the 10 days to administer the NICETEL. Best practice, though, is if you can, have a student come in for a few hours, even if it's just one-on-one, wearing masks, socially distanced, to have them take the NICETEL. But there is that option under the regulations now if you can't do that.
Thanks. If I can just keep you rolling here and answer Glenn's question about that he asked, that he believes that he read that all state testing would need to be in person. And I think you alluded to this earlier when you said something about how the state wants to ensure that the testing is equitable, but could you sort of speak specifically to this question about the testing needing to be in person?
Yeah, so unfortunately, and the state does not have the capacity to administer the state exam remotely to the extent that it needs to be for all students across the state. So we just don't have the capacity to have a remote assessment for the state exam. And so the assessment, as in past years, will be administered in person if we're able to do that. I believe that if it is administered, if the assessments are administered rather, that it would be a good barometer of where your students are, and hopefully a sound tool to deploy intervention strategies, but that would need to happen in person. Was that your last question for me?
Yes. and I was going to
Chris, I just wanted to plug something.
Go plug away.
Just as a reminder, we had to change this a few times, so I did want to remind people that tomorrow at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, we have a BEDS webinar. So if you are dying to know about BEDS, you can join our webinar, 4 p.m. Eastern. I put the link in the chat to our WebEx. Please join us if you can. It's geared more towards the people at your school who are actually filling out the reporting requirements. So it's probably not for school leaders, but more for your data team or the person who's actually going to sit down at the computer and enter in BEDS information. All BEDS reporting is being done through this, most BEDS reporting, I should say, is being done through the state SERS system. So you'll get the joys of learning all about that. So you might want to pass that link along to your data team, or have them email me at david.frank@niced.gov.
And happy BEDS Day 1 day in advance.
That's right. Tomorrow is BEDS Day. Nothing is due on BEDS Day, by the way.
No.
It's due in the future.
The day of the data day tomorrow. Both Susie and David answered questions in the Q&A that I just want to touch on briefly about financial contingencies and sort of the current prediction, if you will, forecast around state aid cuts. And so just to echo something that they both said for the sake of the larger group, or they both put in the Q&A answer to specific questions. The governor is still said that he will not be making any additional decisions about adjustments until mid-November, which is after the election. And so if you would typically be doing mid-year budget updates at this point, my personal recommendation is wait, because I think the lots of data points will be very different. There will be more data points that will be very significant a month from now. And so if you can wait 4 weeks, I would highly recommend that you wait 4 weeks, because we will collectively be able to look in our crystal ball a little bit better at that point and give you better guidance. So I think that knits together a couple of the pieces of reaction that both David and Susie had to those questions in the Q&A. So I know we're not getting to everything, but I do not want to delay too long of touching on the specific New York City questions and content. So Corey, I'll turn it over to you to address stuff in the Q&A and any other furious multitasking that you may have learned about colors, color coding, colored maps, colors of the rainbow, you know, all of it.
Yeah, no, we're still waiting on the list. I wish the world worked that quickly. So I'll just go through some of the questions in the chat that I think were not. I'm taking down most of the ones about if you're in any of the impacted zones. So a question on, can we pick up grab and go learning materials? Great question. As I think everyone knows, like the schools that closed today at least had yesterday to be in the building. So totally fair question. Claire's question on STARS ATS, I am going to ask you to email Randall Iserman. If you don't have his email address, please let me know. But he is the STARS ATS guru, and so he will absolutely get you back on that. Stacy's question, I have it with whether or not staff can enter the buildings. The question about some schools got letters that were not in the zip code. I think what a lot of you received Monday morning was the charter school office sent out just the exemplar letter that went out to all the district principals in the affected districts. That was just as an FYI. I think they shared that with the entirety of the charter school office listserv. And then it was only later in the afternoon that if you were in one of the impacted zip codes that you received a follow-up email. So hopefully that clears that up. Stacy, got your ventilation questions. Yes, I don't know when the next DOE facilities office hours are. I know those have been switched. I know Tom is still doing them. It's just not every week now. I'll make sure to get this to DOE, both of your questions on the ventilation reports and the issue about the air vents, because I do not know the answer. And so I think that's all I saw that's New York City specific. I did want to just say, those of you who joined the DOH call on Friday, because, not because of any of the craziness of this week, but because of what has been happening just generally with the Situation Room, we were going to be switching to a model of every 2 weeks with Tracy from DOH to answer your questions. So we will most likely not be having a call this Friday, though who knows now, because we might have more things that we need to address with school. So stay tuned, but generally that's how we're moving forward. And then I think the only other thing I wanted to make sure that schools knew about, both our collaborative team and the Randall Iserman and our school supports team have been doing a lot of Q&A and technical assistance with schools around the special education billing the cycle that just ended with payment cycle 3. And I just am going to post in the chat here where they are hosting, the collaborative and the school supports is jointly hosting a session on Friday that if schools have questions about billing cycle 3 and information that they put in or want to learn and share best practices, I would invite you to join that. And I think that's all. And I don't know if you want to go back and do any of some of the other questions.
Sure, I'm happy to. So Evan's question, can a school legally require staff to get tested? What's considered best practice? We hosted a webinar back in August with a phenomenal HR lawyer that I'd refer you to that is archived on our website. And I think that the answer is sort of like you could if you wanted to, but it may create as many problems as it solves. And really that, at least as of right now, the controlling law here is still about ADA accommodations and what a school's policies are in terms of granting leave above and beyond what is legally required, which wouldn't be implicated by someone who was refusing to be tested. So I think, Evan, I'll echo David and Ralph Rossi and say definitely consult with your legal counsel, but I would also refer you to the webinar that we held back in August, because that question was specifically addressed by a great HR lawyer much more eloquently than I'm saying here. But I think I would just go further and say, if you are contemplating requiring staff to be tested and refusing to be tested is an additional way that staff could exercise their desire to not be in person, you might want to think through what your other sort of staff handbook parameters are in the current context and be sure that those are in keeping with even some of the new family and parental leave laws and things like that. So if we can be more helpful with that, feel free to reach out directly. And then I guess last, rounding it out, Julie asks, any sense of whether or not we will be required to conduct the NISA this year? I honestly have not thought about that. Does anyone have any?
That's a really good question, Julie. And because the NISA testing window isn't, I believe it starts in March, the state has not taken a position on that yet. I know that our Office of Special Ed is looking into it, but they wanted to wait a little bit longer before making that determination. I'll follow up with them, and that's actually a great thing to come back to at the next webinar, Anna, so we can close the loop regarding Julie's question.
Great, I'll make a note. All right, so for now, we'll bid you all adieu with the promise to follow up at a minimum over email or to convene another conversation if need be, when and if greater details are known about the color coding and implications for school operations. So be well, and as always, let us know if there's anything we can be doing to be helpful.
Thank you, everybody, and hang in there.